Why don't we get started? Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning to our Bend the Arc press conference. I want to just say a word about introductions of who's standing behind me in a socially distanced way with masks. Over here is Assistant District Attorney Terry Harmon, who oversees our sexual assault issuing and South County teams. Next to her is Supervising Deputy District Attorney Lee Frazier of the General Felony Team, which prosecutes hundreds of cases each year. Behind me is Victim Services Director Casey Halcone, whose team provides services to thousands of crime victims each year. Assistant District Attorney Scott Sway oversees our major fraud, consumer, environmental, insurance, and violent felony teams. Supervising Deputy District Attorney Dan Okonkwo of our issuing team, which reviews tens of thousands of police reports every year. Supervising Deputy District Attorney Chris Ariola of our community prosecution team, which works directly with underserved and crime-impacted neighborhoods. And finally, my District Attorney Bureau Chief of Investigators, Mo Reyes, who is in charge of our 80 sworn peace officer investigators. The newly written name of George Floyd has joined the masses of others on a memorial wall at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama, on streets and murals in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and in all our consciences. It was shouted in protests outside the White House and scrawled in children's chalk on sidewalks in my neighborhood just a few miles from here. His name was cried out by a country in national pain, and it has been followed by a burning question that can't be ignored. What will you do now? 2 months ago, I pledged that I would listen carefully, think deeply, and then act boldly. This is why I invited you here today. After listening to a diverse group of community leaders, criminal justice reform advocates, elected officials, neighborhood activists, and members of this district attorney's office, I have heard that cry, I have heard that question, what will you do now? And then I began to hear ideas. What I heard is less incarceration and more rehabilitation. What I heard is more drug treatment, more mental health services, more diversion, more sentencing alternatives. I heard less prison. I heard a righteous call to address race and equity. I heard a cry for more oversight of police officers. I heard a call to weed out bad officers and help good officers become great officers who are powerful and compassionate guardians of our community. Today we are announcing our first slate of reforms based in large part on what we've heard. Please note the word first. We are moving with urgency because injustice demands urgency, but we will not stop moving forward. We must question ourselves, we must change. And change is hard. However, not changing in the face of a community that is truly wondering if the criminal justice system is fundamentally fair is not an option. To make the system more fair and more equitable, we need to have change as a constant state. We call this effort Bend the Arc. The phrase, taken from a 1965 speech by Martin Luther King Jr., in which he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." This phrase has become a guiding light in our district attorney's office. It gives us a powerful reminder that we can't just sit back and wait and hope that justice happens. It won't. We have to actively, purposely, intentionally seek justice and pursue justice to achieve justice. In that spirit, I am proposing these reforms to serve as a bridge and to strengthen the trust between law enforcement and the people we serve, which is essential for the health and well-being of our democracy. The reforms I am announcing today flow along 4 themes: community initiatives, internal policies and practices, robust and independent investigation of criminal officer misconduct, and systemic changes. Community initiatives. Every year, we seize illegal money in the tens of thousands from gangsters and criminal organizations who have preyed on our community. We are now creating a process that will award that money to various organizations who are successfully addressing racial inequities in our community. These criminal groups often target communities of color. We believe this effort, grounded in restorative justice, will reinvest some of what these crooks have stolen from the community back into the community for the benefit of everyone. We are creating a worker exploitation task force that will launch targeted investigations to protect and heal the victims of labor trafficking, wage theft, and illegal exploitation, and raise awareness about how these insidious crimes negatively impact our communities of color. This task force will work with many stakeholders, including our county's Office of Labor Standards Enforcement, as well as immigrant advocacy groups. We will send DA staff from our Victim Services Unit out each week to community-based organizations to allow us to connect more easily with crime victims who are disproportionately African American and Latino and who need victim services, but who may feel reluctant to call or come into the DA's office. Outreach to specific community-based organizations that serve communities of color is one way that we can improve our services and make sure that we are reaching all who need assistance. Internal policies and practices. With every single case we review, and there are more than 30,000 a year, we put them through a test that includes such basic questions as, was there a crime committed, and can we prove it beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury at trial? We are changing that section in our policy and procedure manual to read, what should we prove? Not what can we prove, what should we prove? This is a vital question. This is a vital question that includes race and equity considerations. It may seem to some that changing the phraseology of a policy manual will have minimal effect, but the PPM is our guiding set of policies, practices, and procedures. Every prosecutor must read and follow the PPM. A more powerful focus on race and equity will yield significant and positive changes in the way all of our 200 prosecutors handle their cases. We will create a system that will allow defense attorneys at any time before trial to send us social history information about the defendant and any mitigation. We may handle 30,000 cases a year, but each defendant is a human being, a member of our community, entitled to dignity and respect, and who deserves understanding of their life circumstances. One of the things I implemented since becoming DA is office-wide visits to state prisons, including San Quentin. We must not only see our cases at the front end, but truly grasp the implications of what is at stake. We will now make it mandatory for all prosecutors to visit jail and prison, study conditions, learn about rehabilitation programs, and speak with inmates. Every person is entitled to human dignity. For years, we have required our prosecutors to do a certain number of hours riding along with police officers on duty in their patrol cars. Our new policy will require that prosecutors also spend hours riding along or hanging out with community-based organizations. Again, seeing the world through the lens of law enforcement is important, but seeing the world through the lens of our victims, our defendants, and all facets of our incredibly diverse community is vital for us to serve all the people with respect, dignity, and understanding. Robust and independent investigation of criminal police misconduct. Who will police the police? Who will police the police? It's one of today's most urgent questions. To further generate trust with our community and to firm up oversight, we will create a public and law enforcement integrity team. The plea team will work closely with independent police auditors in San Jose and Palo Alto, as well as the internal affairs units in all county law enforcement agencies to investigate criminal misconduct of officers, including excessive use of force. The plea team will have 2 to 3 prosecutors and 1 to 2 investigators. The plea team will meet regularly with the IPAs and the internal affairs units in the county to make sure the DA's office is reviewing and investigating all officer misconduct that may be criminal. If an officer has broken the law, plea will determine whether to keep the case or if it should go to a different team in the DA's office, depending on the nature of the crime. The plea team will proactively train law enforcement agencies about what incidents to forward to the DA's office. The plea team will also train the DA's office staff on what cases should be investigated if DA staff comes across information that may consist of criminal officer misconduct. Let's talk a little bit now about large-scale systemic changes, the fourth area. We will push to eliminate cash bail, which discriminates against low-income individuals who are disproportionately African American or Latino. It is unfair for a dangerous person to buy their freedom. It is unfair for a poor person who is not dangerous to be deprived of theirs. Basing a defendant's pretrial release on whether he could make a certain bail amount was both bad for public safety and unfair. We were asking the wrong question. How much money does a defendant have? Now we will ask the right question. Is this person safe to release from jail before trial? If the answer is yes, he will be released and supervised no matter how poor. If the answer is no, this person is dangerous, he will be held in jail no matter how rich. Eliminating cash bail will also have a powerfully positive economic impact on race and inequity because it will end the transfer of millions of dollars in bail bond fees out of poor communities to bail bondsmen and instead keep those millions of dollars in the community, working for the community. We will immediately stop filing misdemeanor charges for driving on a suspended license for failure to pay fines and fees in Superior Court. Instead, we'll file these cases in traffic court as infractions only. Previously, we charged this misdemeanor more than 4,000 times per year, making it the most charged crime, and a crime which is focused on poor people who are disproportionately from communities of color. Along these lines, we will stop requesting fines and fees from criminal defendants who are indigent. The state collects very little money from these poor individuals, and we're simply making it harder for them to get off probation and successfully reintegrate back into our society. The DA's office will automatically expunge the criminal record of those who have successfully completed probation. Too many people experience barriers in getting a job or advancing in a career because of an old conviction that is eligible for expungement, but only after going through a lengthy and time-consuming court petition process. Because the criminal justice system has had more Latino and African American defendants than their representation in our community, these barriers disproportionately affect those communities. This initiative will seek to automatically expunge convictions from the records of those eligible without them having to hire a lawyer and make an individual court petition. I'm saving an important change for last. One of the most powerful and revelatory experiences I have had was a recent trip to Montgomery, Alabama, where I visited the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and some of the many locations where chained African Americans were sold into bondage. I went with a church group from San Francisco, as well as a synagogue group from San Francisco, and I was so moved that I took my family there 6 months later, my wife and 2 college-age daughters, and it was a very powerful experience for all of us. I was emotionally challenged and confronted with the devastation caused by slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and abhorrent misuses of the death penalty against people of color, including thousands of hanging coffins at the National Lynching Memorial. In the past, I supported the death penalty when I viewed the heinous murders through the eyes of the victims whose lives had been taken and from their families that might never find peace. But I also trusted that as a society, we could ensure the fundamental fairness of the legal process for all people. With every exoneration, with every story of racial injustice, it becomes clearer to me that this is not the world we live in. In the past weeks, I've tried to look at this issue through the lens of race and equity. There is simply too much systemic racism and unfairness in our entire society, which is then reflected in our criminal justice system. One cannot ignore it. Therefore, I am announcing today that I will no longer seek the death penalty. These cases use up massive public resources and cruelly drag on for years with endless appeals that give no finality to the victims' families. There's the tragic but real risk of wrongful conviction. And shamefully, our society's most drastic and devastating law enforcement punishment has been used disproportionately against defendants of color. George Floyd's legacy is seeding hopeful changes all over the world. It has changed our country and our community. It has changed my office. It has changed me. Thank you. I'll take some questions.
Mr. Rosen, as you know, the San Jose POA is not happy with some of the changes, and the president said Jeff Rosen is just issuing an open invitation to every drunk driver, criminal, and violent gang member to resist arrest. What is your response to that?
As the district attorney, one of the most important responsibilities I have is ensuring that the public and the community trust law enforcement to enforce the laws fairly and equally. I believe that the reforms I'm implementing today, including taking a more narrow focus on standalone 148s, will make our entire community, including our police officers, safer. You know, I'm reminded of the fact that standalone 148 charges, that's resisting, obstructing, delaying, standalone charges for that crime are disproportionately charged against African Americans. 18% of the cases we have filed for standalone 148s have been against African Americans, who comprise between 2 and 3% of our county's demographics. And so I believe that this change, focused on just standalone 148 charges, will help to de-escalate tensions between the police and the community and make things safer for everyone, including police officers. I have worked with police officers for decades in my career, and I understand what a difficult job it is. And so all of the reforms that I'm implementing are with an eye, with a focus to try to help our good police officers become great police officers, and to try to give the community even more trust and confidence in the police and the district attorney's office, which is essential in a democracy and which ultimately will keep all of us safe.
Jeff, are you concerned about any wrongful convictions that are in the jails now that are maybe pending death penalty cases? Will you be taking a second look at them, or taking a second look at a lot of these convictions that may be wrongly prosecuted?
We have a conviction integrity unit in the district attorney's office. We were the first to establish this unit in the country. It's been widely emulated, and we are always in the process of looking at old convictions, whether it's been brought to our attention by a defendant, their family, a member of the public. And during the course of my time as the district attorney, there are several convictions that we have set aside because we couldn't be confident that the right person was convicted. In terms of death penalty cases, there's 4 that I have sought specifically as district attorney. There's 2 that I've inherited, and they're in the appeals process at this point. Yes?
So could you repeat the questions after it was asked because the live stream's having difficulty?
Oh, okay, sure. Maybe my answer gives a clue as to what the question was, but yes, I'll repeat it.
So you were saying that prior to this announcement, you've charged thousands of people with misdemeanors for what is now going to be traffic infractions. But previously, Officer DiStefano from Palo Alto was charged with a drunk hit and run and was able to plead out as an infraction. Is that standard policy for people in general?
You know, I think the specific facts of those cases is something that we've addressed, and the facts are a little different than you've suggested. But what I can say to you is that we have filed more than 4,000 cases each year of people who couldn't pay their fines and fees and were basically poor people and had their licenses taken away. And these people were predominantly from communities of color, and this one change is going to make it a lot easier for thousands of them to get their licenses and also to have it as an infraction and not as a misdemeanor, which can lead to more serious criminal problems going forward. Yes, Robert.
Does your new death penalty stance mean you go back to people from Santa Clara County who are on death row to change it to non-death sentence?
So the question was the fact that I'm not going to seek the death penalty anymore, am I going to go back and change those sentences of the approximately 20 individuals who are on death row from convictions in Santa Clara County? So I think I did a good job repeating the question. So the answer to that is Governor Newsom has currently put a moratorium on executions in the state. If that were to change, yes, then I would go and convert those sentences to LWOP. But he has a moratorium at this time, so there's nothing I need to do. Yeah, Len?
Taking a look at some of these gang defendants who've been in jail without a conviction for years and years.
That have been in jail with?
That have been in jail for a long period of time, years in some cases. Their cases have not been adjudicated.
Oh, okay.
They are incarcerated.
In the jail here. Okay, so the question is, we have a number of defendants that are charged with very serious gang crimes that have been awaiting trial for a long time, and what are we going to do about that situation? So the answer to that is over the last few years, we've made an effort to try to speed up and try to move cases more quickly through the criminal justice system. As you know, I mean, I guess people are flying again. As you know, the civil grand jury several years ago issued a report saying that we were handling cases too slowly. And because of that, a group within the DA's office, the public defender's office, county executive probation, and the sheriff's department began to work more actively on trying to move particularly that relatively small number of gang cases through the system more quickly. The number of cases that had been awaiting trial for a year or 2 years has gone down significantly, but there still are a number of cases awaiting trial. These are cases that often have multiple defendants, which makes it difficult to handle scheduling. And then in terms of trying these cases, because these cases are going to be adjudicated by trial, it's only recently that our courts have begun trying cases again. We basically stopped trying cases for about 5 months, and so we'll work through that backlog as quickly as we can. But I do want to make sort of a larger point that while we're very focused on holding accountable serious gangsters that are terrorizing communities, and predominantly communities of color, at the same time, we do everything we can to encourage gangsters to leave their gangs, to debrief. And we provide all kinds of encouragements for gangsters to do that in terms of lower sentences, in terms of different charges, because we're really motivated on trying to reduce the numbers and the strength and the intensity of the gang crime that we have here in this county. And it was just yesterday at a meeting that I was shown, 4 gang cases, very serious, that we've been prosecuting, that we've been investigating, and that we've charged the last couple months. Horrible shootings, horrible beatings, and it just really reminded me that on the one hand, we're going to hold those people accountable very strictly, and on the other hand, we're going to try to encourage them to leave the gangs, because that's going to benefit not only themselves, but everyone in those communities. Yeah, yes?
Is there a reason that the Mercury News was informed of your death penalty change before the press conference?
So the question is there a reason that the Mercury News wrote a story about the death penalty yesterday? I really have to turn that back to you. The methods and sources of the press have been a mystery to me for a long time, so I don't know how that works. Anything else?
Changes effective immediately, or is it going to take a while to implement?
Some of the changes are effective immediately, not seeking the death penalty, not filing 14601s. Some of the changes will take a little bit of time to implement. For instance, it took us several months to build software that would enable us to automatically expunge marijuana convictions. And now we're going to alter that software to help us automatically expunge thousands of other misdemeanors and low-level felonies. But I'm reminded that in Silicon Valley, there's sometimes bugs that have to be fixed. Yes?
Does that mean anybody with the standalone 148 will have it automatically expunged, or are they going to need to go down the file?
Well, if somebody has been convicted of a standalone 148 charge and they've successfully completed probation, they will be eligible to have that crime expunged, and it will be expunged. But in terms of the question of 148s, I want to make a distinction about something. There's a crime called PC 148, resisting, delaying, obstructing an officer in the performance of their duties. There's also Penal Code Section 69, which is a felony, and that is resisting, delaying, or obstructing an officer by using force or the threat of force. This change does not apply to PC 69s. I think that anyone that attacks an officer, that uses force against an officer, will be prosecuted just like anyone who attacks or uses force against anyone else. Police officers are entitled to no less protection than others. And I often ask myself, if somebody will attack a police officer, will physically attack them and physically harm them, what might they do to me? Yes?
Was your decision on the death penalty controversial within your department? Because I noticed there were several people who had to go forward.
Okay. So the question was, is the issue of not seeking the death penalty something controversial within the DA's office? So the people that were standing next to me didn't leave because of that. Because you can ask them, I don't know if they agree or not, but it was really more to kind of focus. This is, of the 30,000 cases we prosecute a year, there are a small number which I'm very actively and personally engaged in. And the death penalty cases that we've reviewed, and there's approximately 10 we've reviewed to decide whether to file death, 4 where I filed death, those are cases that I'm intimately involved in terms of all of the facts. And ultimately, the decision whether or not to seek the death penalty was really my own, and it was a very personal decision. And I listened, and I got input from prosecutors and defense attorneys, but at the end of the day, it was something that I had to reflect on. In terms of controversy within the DA's office for not seeking this, I haven't heard that, but You know, as the DA, I don't know that I hear everything that happens like I used to when I was a deputy. I would say in terms of, I've had conversations with many community leaders about the death penalty, conversations with many police officers and police chiefs, and I would say generally people either agree with what I'm doing or understand it, think that it's reasonable and get it. And yes, there are a few that are that strongly disagree with it, and that's their right. They're entitled to that. People have strong opinions about the death penalty, and I certainly, for many years when I supported the death penalty, I respected the views of those who were against it. I didn't agree with it at the time, but I respected those views. Over time, my views have evolved, and facts and circumstances have changed, and you know, I'm evolving and trying to make the best decisions, and so I certainly would support people, would understand why people would still support the death penalty, and would say I respect their views as well. Yeah.
I have a question about drug crimes.
About what?
Drug crimes.
Yes.
In 2019, there was an announcement that you were going to stop charging people for small amounts of like meth and cocaine.
Yes.
What happened with that? But I know police departments are still arresting people.
So the question is, how are we prosecuting drug possession crimes? We announced several months ago that we would only file standalone drug possession or drug under the influence crimes if a person did 3 or more standalones in a year. As a result of our change in policy, we have filed 7,000 fewer drug possession and drug under the influence crimes, and we have referred and encouraged and moved those people towards drug treatment. I think it's important as the DA to recognize that my focus is public safety, and public health is a different focus. And so drug treatment facilities and public health departments, I want to incentivize them and provide opportunities for them to provide drug treatment and not have that handled through the criminal justice system, unless it becomes a public safety issue where somebody is committing other crimes in addition to possessing drugs. Robert?
First of all, to answer the earlier question, I mean, people in trench coats and parking garages. But with respect to the police oversight, where does that fit as far as hierarchy goes? I mean, is this meant to supplement? Is this meant to supersede existing internal affairs and police officer processes? How is this exactly?
So the question is, how will the public and law enforcement integrity team be constituted? What's the structure that it's replacing or adding on to, and how will it interact with other groups that monitor police misconduct? So the answer to that is for many years I've had a public integrity unit. John Chase is the lead in that unit. He sits 2 doors away from me, and he reports directly to me. We are expanding. It was the public integrity team that handled use of force allegations, most recently the 3 correctional officers who beat to death Michael Tyree. That case was investigated and prosecuted through the public integrity unit. So what we are doing is expanding the focus of that unit, public and law enforcement integrity. We're adding additional prosecutors and investigators, and the instructions to the members of that team are to work with IPAs. San Jose has one, Palo Alto has one, to work with whatever community review boards different city police departments have, and to also be in regular contact with internal affairs units in the county law enforcement agencies and ask, is there anything that's come in the last month or the last quarter that you think might be criminal misconduct and not just administrative, not just policy? And so that's why we're also going to train the law enforcement agencies as to what we're looking for in the DA's office, what might be criminal misconduct as opposed to just administrative. We're not looking to become the internal affairs unit for the county. The police departments will handle administrative and policy violations. The internal affairs units will handle administrative and policy violations, but the district attorney's office will independently investigate and review misconduct that may be criminal, including excessive force.
As you know, some DAs are taking another look at even canceling gang enhancement charges in cases like that. Is that something you're also looking at, or how do you feel about that?
I think that gang crimes are a real scourge and blight on our community, and particularly our poor African American and Latino communities. I believe that serious gang crimes need to be dealt with seriously in order to help those communities thrive. However, in addition, we are looking specifically at whether or not to charge gang crimes with a misdemeanor. And the policy that we're coming out with, that's mentioned in the handout, is that for crimes that are misdemeanors, we're not going to add a gang enhancement to that absent some extraordinary public safety reason. Because adding a gang enhancement to a misdemeanor makes it a felony and gives it felony impact in terms of job opportunities, educational opportunities. And so we're going to really pull back from filing gang enhancements on misdemeanors. The focus of where most of our gang enhancements are filed are on serious and violent offenses: murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, and we'll continue to do that in order to protect our community. But as I said, at the same time that we're going to prosecute vigorously serious gangsters, we're also going to offer them a way to get a shorter sentence by leaving the gang and debriefing, and thereby helping themselves rehabilitate, weakening the gang, and helping that neighborhood thrive. So it's really at both ends that we're going to look at this. Okay? Yes. Yes. That the case of Officer Wayne Benitez is how he pronounces his name, I believe. The case of Officer Benitez in Palo Alto is one that we are actively investigating, and we'll have a decision on that forthcoming. And when we make a decision, we will certainly announce it. Thank you so much. Thank you.